Well, I think we're going to have some more students. We'll see, but I'm going to teach to Leslie and Julie and the camera until they get here. And so this is kind of part 2 of the curriculum we're putting together for our parenting courses on Wednesday night, Parenting with Purpose. Part 1 was based on the book Parenting by Paul Tripp, or Parenting? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Parenting, yeah. For some reason, when I said it, it sounded wrong. I was thinking Parenthood. No, that's the book by Bill Cosby, is there? Or somebody know Paul Reiser, or who made that book? I forget. Yeah, Parenting by Paul Tripp. And do you have it in your bag there? Okay. And then, so you know how much I took directly from the book.
Then I just have your handbook.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So the course that we're doing second now is based on a book called Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp. And you might be wondering, is there a relation? Yes, Ted Tripp is Paul Tripp's dad. So pretty interesting. You got a father who kind of is known for writing on the subject of parenting, and now he has a son who writes on the same subject. So these guys have been working on this theory for generations, and they do a pretty good job at trying to understand what does the Bible say about people, human nature, life, and apply that directly to parenting. Of course, there are direct principles from the Bible too that they get. So that's what we're going to be doing. Shepherding a Child's Heart is the basis for this course, and the course is kind of broken into 2 segments. The first one, part 1, is Foundations for Biblical Parenting. And it is, as you would guess, going to be a lot of review from last semester. And it is, there are more segments in that section, but it's shorter actually, because this book does in very short order what Paul Tripp takes to do in a whole book. This takes it as just the beginning for then getting into the second part, which is highly focused on application. It's shepherding through the stages of childhood. So a lot of the things you were left wondering and asking last semester, like these are all good principles. Now I have a question. My kid's doing this. How do I, so this is going to really get into a lot more detail with that. Obviously, we can't address every question preemptively in the content, but the other good thing about this class, and I didn't put it on a slide, I was tempted to, but I didn't. I went through for the course plan for this and identified there are 19 chapters in the book, and we have 14 weeks. So at first I was like, uh-oh, we're going to be doing a lot of doubling up. But as I started then working on turning chapters into class periods, I realized I think we're going to be able to get through all this in about 9 or 10 classes. So now we have 4 extra class periods. So that leaves a lot of time for Q&A. So during class, we can stop and have Q&A. And then I think I will, every couple of class periods, I'm going to work in some built-in Q&A. There are good discussion questions at the end of each chapter, and so we'll pick and choose from those. So those are the 2 sections. Today we're going to start on the first of those, which is the Foundations for Biblical Parenting. And this is going to start sounding where it starts sounding familiar, the review from last semester. The Bible teaches that the heart is the control center for life. And so a person's life is a reflection of their heart. And because of that, we're going to begin this study by reviewing some of the foundations for biblical parenting. And like I said, this is going to be some review, but it's helpful even as the person who went through leading the class last semester, even though it's review, it's stated kind of differently. This is from a different person's perspective. It also is written before the other book. So in some ways, because it's more primitive, if you will, that's my word. I don't mean it as demeaning like it might come across, but this is kind of the core truths that Paul Tripp then built on in his book. So because it's more foundational, basic, if you will, or primitive in the way it's stated, I found it refreshing, kind of like back when we started CBC almost 20 years ago, we would have baptisms in a pool at the school that we were renting, Woodhaven High School or Patrick Henry Middle School. And I can't tell you how many baptisms I had witnessed by that time, more than I could count. But I just remember the first time, I think Billy Cochran might have been one of the first baptisms we did there. And I just remember the first time I watched it, I was just moved. And I'm like, why is this affecting me differently? And I think it's because removing all of the cultural setting and, a baptism tank inside of a finished auditorium, removing all of those things that I was used to forced me, hey, come on in. There are several other people signed up, and I think they're around the building trying to get their kids situated, so come on in. Yes, this is the same as last semester, and that first part of class, we could almost start 15 minutes late for a group of people who have kids to get situated. And we know it because it's a parenting class. But as I was saying, that baptism with all of the kind of external additional things we put on it to make it functional, and just the primal, a person is symbolizing their death, burial, and resurrection with Christ. And it was just really moving. So like that, the review, we're just saying this class, the beginning, it's 2 parts. The first part, I'll back up just a step for you. The first part is, I was on it already, Foundations for Biblical Parenting. The second part is shepherding through the stages of childhood. That's where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of all the questions you had about what your kid's doing last semester. But we're going to start off by reviewing some foundational things, because a person's life, we want to remind everybody, and we have some folks enrolled. I'm not sure if they'll be here tonight, but we have some folks enrolled who didn't take first semester, so we want to make sure they get this groundwork too. A person's life is a reflection of their heart. So it's important ground that we have to cover, make sure everybody starts off level on that, and it's worth the review. So let's talk about getting to the heart of behavior. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And this is a really graphic word picture if you stop and think about it. I mean, you think about like a stream, the head of a river where all the water is flowing and building a trench. I mean, it's literally digging a path for itself because all of the water flowing there. And the heart is a well from which all of the issues of life gush forth. And this same theme is restated over and over in the Bible. And it's telling us that the behavior a person exhibits is an expression or an overflow of their heart. So you could picture it like this. The heart determines behavior. What you say and what you do expresses the orientation of your heart. Are you oriented toward God with a relationship with Him? Are you oriented away from God in rebellion against Him? Our hearts reveal that. And so that's why in Mark 7:21, Jesus says it this way. He says, what comes out of a person's heart is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, evil, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. So, Paul, as you were walking in, I had just finished saying, you're going to hear a lot of things that sound familiar, and before you think, wait, I took this class already, the beginning of the class is review. We'll have some folks who attend who weren't in that first class. So we're going to lay that groundwork and go over it in some ways I think that will be helpful, supplemental to what we did learn, which will then lead us into a section. I'm going to show you the 2 parts. So the first part of the study will be Foundations for Biblical Parenting, and then we'll get into shepherding through the stages of childhood.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just curious, like, when you talk about the heart, like as a pastor, how do you define the heart?
Yeah, good question. We will talk some about that, but when we talk about the heart in modern times, we talk about your emotions. That's, like he wears his heart on his sleeve. It's a guy who's not afraid to show his emotions. or man, don't be so cold, have a heart, be compassionate, that kind of thing. That actually, in the biblical times, would have been referred to. I feel like we talked about this at some point. I don't remember what the context was, but that would have been the bowels. Like, so you hear the phrase in the New Testament, the bowels of compassion. They thought of their guts when they thought of emotions. It's just weird. Neither one of them are really about your emotions, but culture. So, but in biblical times, the heart, we do still have some remnants of that connotation. Like when you say, let's get to the heart of the matter. You're talking, and we get that because in the human body, the heart is a central organ. I mean, you can lose a hand, you can lose an eye, you can't lose your heart. I mean, you could lose an eye and not replace it. I guess you could, if you want to be really clever, you could say you could lose a heart. They put cow hearts or whatever, artificial hearts. Well, you gotta have something in there. You can't be heartless, no pun intended. But you can be eyeless, you can be handless, you can't be heartless. So that's similar. When they say heart in the Bible, they're getting both Old and New Testament, they're getting at the innermost person, the real you. That's what they're talking about. The part of you that makes you you. And so it does have, as all words have, what they call a semantic range. So there can be different emphasis on it. It can be talking about your innermost thoughts, or your innermost motivations, but on the whole, it's generally be talking about that internal part of you. There's a corporal part of you, your body, and then there's an immaterial. Just as material part, there's an immaterial part of you. That's the heart. When the Bible talks about that. So let's see. We talked about. I think we left off here. We were quoting what Jesus says about this, the fact that our behavior flows out of our heart. So these evils he talks about, whether it's evil actions or evil speech, come from within us, from our heart. And so what your children say and do is a reflection of what's in their hearts. Luke corroborates this point when he records Jesus as saying this: a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So the person you are in the inside shapes how you even communicate to the outside. These passages are really instructive then for the task of parenting. As we talked about last semester, they teach that the behavior isn't the basic issue. You guys are pros at this now. We spent 12 weeks talking about this. The basic issue is always what is going on in their heart, because that's their control center of life. So it's easy then for parents to get sidetracked, and we want to avoid this. It's easy to get sidetracked with behavior. And here's two key terms that we're going to come back to this semester. If your goal in discipline is changed behavior, so goals, we're going to talk, there's a whole section, several, not chapters, but main segments on goals in discipline. If your goal in discipline is changed behavior, well, it's easy to understand why we would get sidetracked with behavior. That's the thing that alerts you to the child's need for correction, their behavior. It irritates us, or it irritates the situation or the siblings or whatever, and calls attention to itself, and behavior then becomes the focus. You think and the danger is then you think you've corrected the problem when you've changed unacceptable behavior into the kind of behavior that you wanted, sanctioned behavior, acceptable behavior that you appreciate. And you might be thinking, yeah, what's the problem with that? I want to get this behavior to change. And that's understandable desire, but the problem is this: your child's needs are far more profound than their bad behavior. His behavior doesn't just spring forth uncaused. Your daughter's behavior doesn't just spring forth uncaused. Remember, it's bubbling up out of the heart. So, his behavior, the things that he says and does, reflects his heart. If you're really going to help your child, you have to be concerned with the attitudes that are driving the behavior. And this, you had class last semester, so maybe it won't, but this may shock you when I say this. but I believe that it's true and I believe that it's biblical. A change in behavior that does not stem from a change in heart is not a commendable outcome. In fact, it's condemnable. And people, this is recorded, somebody stumbles across our church website and hears me say that, might be like, what is this crazy man talking about? But isn't that the hypocrisy that Jesus condemned in the Pharisees? In Matthew 15, he denounces the Pharisees and he says this about them: you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. Jesus says this is not desirable. In fact, I condemn this, that you would give lip service, and on the inside, you really are rebels.
Where is that at?
That's Matthew 15. Jesus criticizes them as people who wash the outside of the cup and leave the inside unclean. But this is what we're tempted to do in parenting, right? We demand changed behavior, but we fail to address the heart that drives the behavior. So, what are we supposed to do then in correction, in discipline? Well, we have to require proper behavior. We don't say, okay, well, the rules go out the window, and we talked about that several times last semester. But you can't be satisfied to leave it at that. That's what we had concluded. Even though proper behavior is to be expected, it's not good enough on its own. We have to lead our children to ask the questions that will expose the attitude of their hearts and that led them to the wrong behavior. We want to call their attention to their heart. How did their heart stray to produce this behavior? In what characteristic ways has your child's ability or refusal to know, trust, and obey God resulted in actions and speech that are wrong? And I said ability, his inability. So it's easy to think of an example of this, how we can illustrate this, if you live in a home that has more than one child in it. Just think of a time, and if you don't live in a home with more than one child, you know what it's like to have more than one child. You've had a friend over, you know what this is like. Think of a time when two children are playing and a fight breaks out over a toy. It's pretty natural to immediately address the situation with a simple, what do we say? All right, two kids are fighting over a toy, what's your natural reaction? Stop! That's a good one too, actually. Yeah, I didn't think of that one. That's not what I had in mind, actually, but what else? How are you going to settle this matter? What's the first thing you're going to do to settle this?
Share with your sister.
Well, that's better, actually, than the response I was thinking of.
People say who had it first.
Who had it first? Here I stand teaching this class. I was over with my grandchildren last week, and that was my first inclination when they started to go at each other over a toy. And my daughter, who signed up for this class, didn't even take last semester, reminded me of the right way to do it. She didn't correct me or anything. She just demonstrated. She just did this. And she addressed the older child and said, "Can we share with your sister?" And she kind of got at that idea of this is not about. So when you say who had it first, what are you after? Justice. Justice is a good thing, right? But we're not talking about just making sure our home is just. We're trying to help our children see the part of their hearts that cause them to cherish injustice when it's in their favor, right? So this response of who had it first misses the heart issue, even though it seems like the most natural thing to say. Justice is a good thing, but we're not after mere justice. If we look at the situation in terms of the heart, the issue changes then. When we do that, the behavior becomes a window into the heart. So these two kids are fighting over a toy. And so we have to realize we have two offenders here. Now their circumstances are different, but both children are displaying hardness of heart toward their sibling. Both are being selfish. Both are saying, I don't care about you as much as I care about having this toy right now. And so in terms of the heart, you have two sinning children. And if we're going to parent in the way that what our goals are that we're going to talk about in this class, and what we talked about all semester last semester, we care more about let's help our children see why they feel selfish right now. instead of let's just have a just outcome, because just outcomes actually are easier. Oh, well, you had it first, you get it first. When you're done, you can have it. That's pretty cut and dry. But helping your children see their sinful heart, that's another matter. In terms of issues of the heart, these two sinning children are preferring themselves to the other, and the circumstances that cause them to do that are different. One of them got the toy first. They were quick on the draw. They were smart enough to go, that's fun. My sister's going to want it. I'm going for it. They were quick. The other one, is trying to steal, basically. So they both are just being selfish. Circumstances are different, but the heart issue is the same. I want my happiness even at your expense. So then we see how the heart directs their behavior. And this is always true. All behavior is linked to attitudes of the heart. Therefore, discipline must address the attitudes of the heart. And by the way, I'm trying something new today, so if something weird happens between what I'm saying and what you see on the screen, just alert me to it. I figured out a way to have just my notes on here now instead of the slide and the notes, but that means I'm not looking at that. So if what I'm saying totally contradicts what you see up there, it means I made a mistake in my notes, and just raise your hand and let me know. So our discipline has to address their attitudes of their heart. And if we do that, this really does great things for discipline. It makes the heart the issue, not just the behavior. And as a result, it focuses correction on deeper things than changed behavior. Because we remember the most profound thing that's going on here is what's happening in their heart. So our goal is to unmask their sin and help them understand it and how it reflects a heart that needs God's grace. And when we do that, remember toward the end of class, we talked about that leads to the cross. It underscores their need for a Savior because they will run into this wall again and again and again. There's literally a center block wall between them and what we're telling them they're supposed to do. It's their center block wall of their sin nature. And they're going to realize they need the Holy Spirit's help to come in and demo this wall. They can't do it on their own. That's not a biblical analogy, that's my analogy. The biblical analogy is they're dead and they need a resurrection. Both very dramatic analogies. So you might be wondering, all of that from a fight over a toy? Yes, but as we also talked about last semester, not all in one sitting. Your kids are not going to come away from that one circumstance where you point out to them that they're both being selfish. We need to love each other. And so we need to share. And so what does that look like for you? It means patiently waiting. What does that look like for you? It means giving up the thing and preferring your sister over yourself. There are both changes that need to be made. And they're not going to come away from that situation and go, as a 2-year-old, oh, I see I have a wicked heart that should cause me to want to repent and seek God's help. But over time, that pointing out and helping them understand to see what's happening going on inside of them, what's making them feel the way they're feeling, and do the things they're doing and say the things they're saying. This is an emphasis that we're going to take as foundational through the rest of this course, because out of the heart flow the issues of life, and therefore parenting is concerned with the shepherding of the heart. I'm going to send you guys tonight or tomorrow morning an article. I just Monday got an article in my email from Gospel Coalition, I think it was, and it was on the topic of gentle parenting. Have you guys heard about gentle parenting? Some very helpful ideas, but it's a kind of a trendy approach that's maybe over-exaggerating. I don't want to make it sound like it's just some fad, but it's better than a lot of what I saw growing up, which was just hit your kid, and scream at them and sometimes use profanity. That's not good either. This is an approach that respects that your child is a little human being and feels feelings and has thoughts behind what they're doing. So it recognizes a lot of good things. But it goes over some bad philosophical assumptions that go into it as well and why people have problems with it. But I'll send that to you. But in the article, it talks about shepherding a child's heart, and it actually links back. I didn't click the link, but I could see the word shepherding a child's heart was a hyperlink, and I bet it goes to this book. So we have to be concerned with that, shepherding the heart. And so we have to learn to work from behavior that we see back to the issue of the heart that's causing the behavior to proceed out. And then by persistence over time, and with the operation of the Holy Spirit graciously working in your child, you help your children see it. And as a parent, we need to learn to engage our children, not just reprimand them. You know, they're doing something wrong. It is the most natural thing in the world to just start in on correction. But we need to make sure that they're coming along with us for the ride, that it's not just stop that or you will regret it. There's going to be some element of that involved. We're going to talk about punishment even today. But we want to help them see, we want to bring them along with us, engage them, not just reprimand them, help them see the ways that they're trying to satisfy their soul's thirst with things that cannot satisfy. Help them get a better focus on their problem and on the solution, which is the cross. So if we believe that, it's going to inform everything we do as parents, and it'll dictate our goals. We're going to talk, like I said, about goals. We're going to talk specifically about goals at each developmental phase. And it'll inform our methods. It'll shape the model of how we develop, of how we think of our child's development. And so those two key words are goals and our methods. We're going to go through three different stages of childhood development, and each one of them we're going to talk about the goals of discipline and the methods of discipline. So it's going to be extremely practical, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that with you guys, because for all of the benefit of last semester, I could sense a desperate desire to have practical application like that. So we're gonna address all the facets of child rearing. We'll look at a biblical view of parenting. We'll examine child development, focus on parenting goals, and think through training methods. And in all these topics, we're going to tie it back to shepherding the heart. What you won't get, Tripp makes a big deal of this in the book, and I really appreciated it, is you won't get a clever methodology. I won't be presenting 3 steps to raising trouble-free children. There's no such thing. I don't have any secrets to meeting your children's needs so you can get on with your life either. If I had found those, I would surely bring them to you. There's no such thing. So I hope to provide a biblical foundation for your philosophy of parenting, and then get into some detail of how this applies at the various stages of your child's development. So to start out, we need to understand 2 broad sets of issues that affect your child. You need to understand the shaping influences of your child, your child and his relationship to the things in his life that are molding, that are making impressions in his or her life, and then also your child and his or her relationship to God. So in the next 2 sections, we're going to discuss these 2 arenas of child development. And so we'll start off with your child's development shaping influences. And I was thinking I might be at the break by this point, but I'm not. What time do we break? Do you remember? Is it? 6:45. I think it's 6:40. Is it 6:40? So about 5 more minutes. So we'll get started. Have you ever had one of those really poignant parenting moments where you have this epiphany? Your children are doing something and you're like, I just thought of the best way to help them understand this thing. Or maybe it was teaching them a new skill, or showing them the importance of some key principle that you want them to embrace in life, or some key facet of why you're disciplining them the way, and this is good. You could probably write about this, right? You know, and you start in, and you're like, I hit this out of the park. This is great. And then your kids or your spouse, just as likely, bring you back down to earth from your delusions of parenting grandeur by pointing out that that's boring or they're not following you. They don't understand what you're saying. Well, in the book that we're basing the class on, Ted Tripp talks about a story like that. He's helping his 11-year-old son who was raising pigs. I don't know what the story behind that is. I'm interested to hear a little bit about that. But his 11-year-old is raising pigs, and he's got a problem. So he's trying to feed and water the pigs regularly, and the pigs keep dumping over the water trays. Pigs, I guess, are not very conscientious, and they're kind of clumsy, and so they're going to drink the water, and there's just water everywhere, and the water's always empty and upside down. And so they decide they're going to make some concrete watering troughs. So these things are heavy, they're hard to turn over, and it's a clever solution. And so they're building a wood form, and they're beginning to then pour the concrete into the form, and as they work, Ted begins to tell the boys about how their young lives are like this project that they're working on. The discipline of their household, the rules mom and dad give them, the character building traits that they're working on in their lives are like the wood forms. And their lives are the cement, the concrete that's being poured in. And over time, these wonderful things that their family is providing for them are going to cause the cement to conform, and it will harden in that form, and then it will be sturdy and dependable. And when the form is removed, it will be strong and useful. And the concrete hardened will be their adult lives. And he's going on, he's really nailing the delivery, you can tell he's just doing a good job at this. And the boys are listening politely, but he pauses, kind of takes a breath, and almost dramatic a pause. And the boys are like, "Okay, Dad, see you later." And they run off. They were just waiting for him to take a breath so they could go off. They were clearly not impressed by his brilliant analogy. But it is a useful analogy if you think about it. Our children are shaped and molded by life's circumstances. And all of the aspects of family living have a significant impact on the people that your children become. And so I want to take in this next section time to provide kind of a mental model for you to help you think about and understand the shaping influences of childhood. This term shaping influences is kind of a new term and relatively new with counseling, but the concept is not new. What it signifies is as old as humanity. Shaping influences are those events and circumstances in a child's developmental years that prove to be catalysts for making him the person he is. But it doesn't happen automatically, though. The ways that your child responds to these events and circumstances determine the effect they have on your child. And this, when you first hear this, I don't know about you guys, but when I first started thinking about this, there's a little part of me, when you talk about shaping influences, that says, wait a minute, that sounds a little deterministic, I don't know. We're moral agents. We make decisions. But there's clear biblical warrant for acknowledging the lifelong implications of early childhood experience. You just think about some of the past. Let me ask you first. Can you think of anything the Bible would say that would lead us to give credence to this idea that shaping influences can really have an effect on your child? Anything come to mind? It's okay if nothing does, but I thought before I just rattle off some things.
Train up a child in the way he should go, he won't depart from it.
Okay. Yeah, there's not much clearer. You can't get more direct than that.
I didn't hear, what was that?
The Proverbs, train up a child in the way he shall go, and he won't depart from it when he's old.
Yeah. And it's a proverb, so it's not a promise. Some folks go to that and say, I did everything the Bible says and my child rebelled. No, it's a proverb, but that's the proverbial nature of it is the point, actually.
And I've thought of, it just came to me now, like none of us can actually
No.
So it's kind of, even if it was a promise, it's impossible to like keep our part of the bargain.
Yeah, it's kind of like be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Yeah, it's
If you're perfect, your child will, not depart from it.
yeah,
But it's a problem.
yeah, yeah. They call that in the marketing world that I used to work in aspirational. It's kind of a goal that you put up here. It's not really what the outcome's going to be, but it gives you something to shoot for. But yeah, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not turn from it. Proverbs says that. And its point is that you can have an effect on your child. So it's telling you, do things properly, train them in the way they should go, show them the right way to live, and when he's old, it's going to have an effect. Yeah. You can think of other major passages perhaps as well. Deuteronomy 6 talks about the principles we went over last. We took a whole class period on this and talks about the way that you should take what God says to us and impress it on your children. And then it talks about different life circumstances, like when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking down the street, in the morning, when you get up, at night, when you go to bed. Every part of your family life is context for relating to your children what God says about life and about us and about himself. So that's Deuteronomy 6. Ephesians chapter 6 that talks about fathers and children obeying the parents, and parents raising your children in the nurture or the discipline and training of the Lord. And Colossians chapter 3 as well talks about this. All of these passages, what Paul cited, the three that I listed there, all presuppose the implication that early childhood experience leaves an impression on us. It has an impact on who we become. And the scriptures, as a result, then, are pointing us to give attention to shaping influences. The person that your child becomes is a product of two things. The first is his life experience. That's what we're going to be talking about here, shaping influence. The second is how he interacts with that experience. And you may notice these two things correlate to the what I called earlier key issues for childhood development, the shaping influences and Godward orientation. So first we're going to begin with the shaping influences of life and construct that part of our model, and then we'll move on to talk about the child's response to these shaping influences. Because, and I say this at the outset so you don't do what my tendency might have been, and when I'm talking about shaping influences, to write it off thinking, oh, this sounds like determinism, because it's not. Because it's not just the shaping influences. Your child's not merely acted upon by the circumstances of life. Your child is acted upon and then reacts. He responds according to the Godward orientation of his heart. So understanding this model is going to help us know where your children need structure and shepherding. These influences, both within and outside of our control as parents, come to your child and have significant influence over his or her life. So that's what we're going to do when we come back from the break. We're going to talk about the first of these. All right. So we'll take a break now and... All right, so for the next few minutes, we're going to consider shaping influences. So, the first one is the structure of family life. So we're basically going to be shooting arrows at these kids. Just the idea is, these things are exerting pressure and causing the children to conform. Who they're becoming is shaped by these influences. So the first one's structure of the family. And so that's things like, is the family a traditional nuclear family? Do you have, how many parents is this child exposed to? I had to read that several times when I first came across it, because I'm like, how many parents is the child exposed to? Well, I think about, in my household, I lived with my mom and my stepdad, and then I would go over to my dad's house, and there would be my dad and his girlfriend. And then, that he changed girlfriends 3 times by the time I was 10. And so there's all these different parental figures involved. So when you ask the question, is there a traditional nuclear family, or how many parents is the child exposed to? Our life situations cause there to be a myriad of different situations like that. If you have a blended family, then you've got parental influences in the home and then parental influences in the additional parental home. And all of that has impact. And if you've, I'm trying to think of what friends we had recently were telling us about, in their household, they went to church, they had, I know who I'm thinking of now. And they tried to do what the Bible says, bring your children up in the training and discipline of the Lord. And when they went to their mom's house, it was just a free-for-all. Mom didn't have any belief system, rules were at a minimal, and mom's life was a little bit of a mess. And so you have all of that impacting the kids. So that's an important consideration. Remember, it's not determinism, but it's a consideration. It's something you want to think about. Is it a family of 2 generations or 3? So you've got mom and dad, children, and then it's more rare in our culture. When you get outside of at least my culture that I grew up in, it's more common to have multi-generational. So grandma and grandpa live. I mentioned my dad's girlfriends. One of my dad's former relationships that I have a sister through, they had 4 generations in the house. So they had mom and dad, and then grandma, and then great-grandma lived with them as well. And then there were aunts as well. I mean, this was like the whole family living there. Are both parents alive? Sometimes a child loses a parent early in life. And are they both functioning in the home? Sometimes there might be illness or health or all kinds of problems a parent might have that impairs their functioning in the home. How do the parents structure their roles in the home? So the way you and your spouse structure who does what, and how do you know who does what? That all can have an impact. How do you know who does what? I say that because sometimes when you come into a marriage, you grew up where mom did this and dad did, this is mom's realm, this is dad's realm, and you get married and you find out your spouse's family, the duties didn't divide up the same way, and you're like, well, why aren't you doing that? That's a dad's job. And your spouse is like, well, in my house, that's what my mom did, and so now you're like, well, who's going to do it in our house? So how do you figure that out even? Are there other children in the family? Or is the family organized around only one child? That can have an impact too. These are all things you have to take into consideration. My wife's going to really love that I include this one. What is the birth order of the children? When our kids were younger, she would, I forget, was it a trendy thing? Was it like really big thing in the early 2000s? I just remember a lot of our friends were talking about it. There were like tests you could take, and wasn't there a new book that had come out? What was that called? Anyway, and I was like, sounds like voodoo. But I think there's something to that. A kid who is born into a family, and the first 3 years of that child's life, all they know is, I'm the kid at the house, and then a new kid comes along, and that has an impact on them. Or a child who never knows what it's like to be the only kid in the house. That's the second child. Or maybe the third child, because if there's 3 children, then the second kid is the child who knows what it's like to not really be paid attention to because I am lost in the middle. Those are very overgeneralized, but that's the kind of thing that could be impacting a child's life. What are the relationships between the children? How close or how distant are they in terms of age, ability, or interest, or their personality to the other children? How does the child's personality blend with the other members of the family? So all of these things can, they're parts of the structure of the family, and they can have an impact. They are shaping influences, as we call them, in the life of your child. Tripp tells the story of a couple who came to him for counseling, and they were newlyweds, and kind of like what I alluded to earlier, one of them was really struggling. The wife was really struggling because her husband did not organize his life around her. Now, There's some biblical warrant for, husbands live with your wives according to knowledge in an understanding way. So we are told husbands to study our wives and know how to live well with them. But, she was an only child. And now she felt unloved because her husband didn't treat her like an only child. And you're an only child if your parents are like, you're our miracle child. We love you. And you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You can't do anything wrong. And our whole family is structured around you. And now you have a husband who maybe grew up in a family of 5 kids. And he's like, hey, this is a great partnership, eh? And you're like, partnership? I thought you were here to serve me. So her family life had profoundly shaped her needs and expectations on her husband. So structure can play a big part. Family values is the next shaping influence. What is important to the parents in the home? What is worth a fuss and what just can go without notice? What do the parents really care about? Do mom and dad overtly live like people are more important than things? Or do they frequently demonstrate that, I don't care who you are, you're in trouble if you mess with my fill in the blank, right? Do parents get more stressed over a hole in their school clothes or a fight between schoolmates? What philosophies and ideas is that child hearing on a regular basis? And you can have, mom and dad even have opposing or contradictory philosophies. And so that can all have influence on children. What are the spoken and unspoken rules of the family? There are spoken rules, but there are unspoken rules, right? And kids figure those out. They know what those rules are. Is this the kind of home where children are to be seen and not heard? Where does God fit into the family life? Does the family organize life around knowing and loving God, or is the family motivated by something else? And I'll even highlight on that one. It's one thing to say that our family is organized around knowing and loving God, but you can say that and it not really be that way. And kids will understand what the real value set there is. They'll recognize if we say that this is important, but we don't treat it like it's important, and it will impact them. What are the boundaries within the family? For example, where are secrets kept and when are they told? So things like relationships with the neighbors. Are you instinctively open or closed with the people you live around? How high do you build the walls around your family? And what do you allow to get through there? Some families would never tell their relatives their problems, but would freely disclose everything to their neighbors. But on the other hand, some families, they don't even know their neighbor's name, but their families are an open book, and they are very open with the people they live directly around. Some children grow up never knowing how much money their dads earn or what the checkbook balance is on any given day. Other children hear about the money problems all the time, and that all impacts children. Some parents keep secrets from their children. And, I kind of alluded to in how I read that last one, sometimes it's okay to not disclose everything that's going on in your family to your children. They're children, they don't need to, some things in life are big and scary and they're not prepared to properly be able to digest them yet. Some things that are big and scary kids need to be introduced to. Sin, for example. Some children share secrets, but not with their parents, so there's not open communication between parents and children. Sometimes mom and the kids keep secrets from dad. Sometimes dad and the children don't tell mom. And this all has influence on the kids. Every family has established family boundaries, and they may not be spoken or thought through, but every family has them. So structure of family life, family values, and then family roles. Within the family structure, there are roles that each family member plays. Some fathers are involved in every aspect of family life. Other families, dad is busy. Dad is distant, dad travels, or dad is, dad's at work all the time. Subtle things like who pays the bills or who makes family appointments communicate to children what the roles in the family are. Children have roles within the family too. Tripp tells of one home in which the children are required to put their father's socks and shoes on him because he's obese and he's uncomfortable doing it himself. And that's difficult in itself. But the cruel and harsh way he requires them to do this is a powerful shaping statement to the kids of what their place in the family is. They're treated like servants. So what are the family roles? What does each family member, where do they fit into the family? That's a shaping influence. Another influence is family conflict resolution. Anyone who does marriage counseling can testify to the power that family influence has in the resolution of problems. And this man, when I was reading through this description, I was like, yep, I can see that. I can see that in my own history, in my own past. Does the family know how to talk about its problems? Do family members resolve things, or do they simply walk away? Are problems solved by biblical principle or by power? Do members of the family use nonverbal signals, like giving a dozen roses, to resolve conflict? And I'm not, rendering judgment on that either way. I'm just saying, how do we communicate? And how sensitive are we to the way the others in our family prefer communication? People have different styles of communication. Tripp tells the story about Sammy, who would go to school and would get upset about something in class. This is kindergarten. Would just get up and run out of class. Like, anytime he didn't like what was going on, he would just get up and run out of class. And the teacher called parents in for a conference, and they're talking with the parents, and dad starts to get frustrated with the teacher, and so dad gets up and just leaves the meeting. And the teacher's like, okay, I see what's going on here. There's some shaping influence going on here. So the way we handle family conflict shapes the way our children think about that. Family response to failure. A related shaping issue to how the parents deal is how parents in a family deal with their children's failures. And this is a big one. You go through childhood and it is filled with awkward attempts and failed efforts. That is what growing up is like. And immature children learning to master the skills of living in a complicated world, they're going to make mistakes. And so this is really critical. An important issue for our purposes is, how do we treat, as parents, those failures? Do children just get made fun of when they fail? Are they made to feel foolish, belittled? Are they mocked for their failures? Does the family find amusement at the expense of other family members? And there's a sense in which you could walk into the offices here any given day and you could maybe hear us ribbing each other, and we wouldn't do that to each other if we didn't like each other. There's a kind of joking you only do with people you like, because if you really didn't like them, you wouldn't make jokes about not liking them. You know what I mean? But there are families in which it's not done in that way. You're not making fun of them and telling them you don't like them because you really do. You really don't. And it's hard to imagine, probably, I hope for you, but that happens. Some parents, on the other hand, have a marvelous ability to look at their children's failures and be able to find praiseworthy effort behind that. Well, you really tried. I can tell you really tried. And I'm not talking about give everybody who loses a trophy. I'm not saying that. I know that is a trend in our culture that I think has maybe seen its day in past. I don't know. I think people are fed up with that kind of thing. But you don't have to give everybody a trophy to recognize that you really tried. You should keep trying. That was good. I mean, you didn't win. That person won. I'm okay with telling you didn't win, but I'm also really proud of how hard you worked. Good job. And those kind of parents always encourage. They are adept at neutralizing the efforts of disaster. Something bad happens, and you help your children see that the world is not over because this bad thing happened. So whether the child has known as a rule in their household commendation, credible, Tripp uses the word credible commendation. So we don't just fluff them up, just say nice things that are obviously not true, but we look for the bright spots and we try to highlight that for them. Or whether they grew up just being accustomed to criticism, nagging criticism all the time, or some mix of those things. Either way, it's going to have a powerful shaping influence in their life. And then finally, family history. Family members are born, family members die, there are marriages, there are divorces, families experience social stability or instability. There's either enough money or there's not enough money. Some enjoy good health while others structure their lives around sickness or disease. Some have deep roots in the neighborhood, others are uprooted continually. Tripp, this is a heartbreaking story. Tripp tells the story of a woman who he was trying to help sort through her childhood in counseling. And the conversation basically goes like this. So how many times did you move during childhood? And she says, I moved a lot of times. And Ted says, 5, 10? She says, no, more than that. And he says, maybe less than 20? And she stops for a few minutes. She's kind of thinking and calculating through this house, this house, this house. And then she says, nope, it was way more than 20. And she told him later that her and her sister counted up 46 moves before she turned 18. 40. I went to 3 different elementary schools. I had about 2 grades per school and then one school for 5th grade. And that was difficult. And I heard this and I was like, holy cow. That family history had a profound shaping influence on this woman's values and perspectives. So this is just a brief list. I mean, there could be other things we put up there, but these are some core things that kind of suggest the kinds of circumstances that have impact on our lives. And you can't deny that these kind of things impact us as we're growing up. So then let's talk about these kinds of shaping influences, because we can make some mistakes when we talk about these, and I alluded to them before we headed into this section. First mistake is seeing shaping influences deterministically. We can say, I grew up in a family where church just wasn't important. And so now that is why every time I turn, I take the extra hours, I go on trips, I'm just horrible at being faithful in church. Well, okay, so you're making those decisions though, right? It's true, you grew up with that shaping influence, but it's not deterministic. That is the error of assuming that your child is a helpless victim of the circumstances in which he was raised. So we are not, we don't lack total agency. We're not inert is the word I was trying to think of. An inability to move, like this water bottle is inert. I could be like, water bottle, get in the hallway. And it's just going to sit there. It's inert. Our children are not inert. But the second mistake is kind of on the other polar end. It's denial. It's the mistake of saying that your child is unaffected by their early childhood experience. And passages such as Proverbs 29:21 illustrate the importance of childhood experience. A servant pampered from youth will turn out to be insolent. It's a proverb again, but the reason the proverb works is because there's a general truth here, and that is a servant pampered from the time they are young is affected in a manner that brings around a poor result. So what happens when they're young has an influence, has an impact. So neither denial nor determinism is the correct approach. We need to understand these shaping influences biblically instead. And so that's what we're going to try to do. That understanding is going to be extremely valuable in your task as a parent, because it's a big mistake to conclude that parenting is nothing more than providing the best possible shaping influences for your children. Because you can train up a child in the way they should go. In general, they're not going to turn from it, but that's not a promise, we said, right? Because can you think of anybody in the Bible who did everything right and their child rebelled? I don't mean they did it almost right. I mean they were perfect. Not one mistake. Genesis chapter 3. God puts Adam and Eve in the perfect paradise. He gives them everything they need to live just the idyllic human life. He walks with them daily and speaks with them as one man speaks to his friend. He, talks to them face to face. They have everything they need to eat. They have direction and purpose. They're told, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth with other image bearers, tend the ground. He gives them meaning and purpose. And what do? Another voice comes along and says, I think there might be a better way. And they go, tell us. And they didn't even have a sin nature. Right? They had an unconfirmed holy nature, is what theologians call it. They could choose to sin or choose not to sin. God did everything right. So it would be a big mistake for us to think, well, if I get it mostly right, everything's going to be okay. So we can't make that mistake that many Christian parents adopt, this Christian determinism. They figure if they can protect and shelter their child well enough, or if they can always be positive with their child, if they can send them to Christian schools or homeschool their child, if they can provide the best possible childhood experience, then their child will turn out okay. But parents who do this are sure that the proper environment is what's going to produce the proper child, but that's faulty premise. They're acting like their child's inert. And their child's not inert. If I want this water bottle on the floor, I can't go, water bottle, get on the floor. I can't just assume the water bottle knows I want it on the floor. I have to, it's inert. I pushed it, it went. But that's not what children are like. Children are like this. Get on the floor. That's what children are like, right? Sorry, I got a little youth pastor jumped out of me right there. They have a mind of their own. And not only is it inaccurate to think of our children as blank slates, we have to realize that our children are born with the nature that they inherited from us, right? That was all last semester. My wife was an art minor in college, and we've talked over the years about how she really enjoyed that chance to take pottery classes. And in fact, she made some mugs and bowls that we still have. Actually, I think the girls might have had the bowls. We sold some in a garage sale. I can't believe we did that. They have like her initials on the bottom and the year she made them, 1993 or 92 or 4 or whatever year it was you made that.
That's why you should never get rid of anything.
That's why I'm a...
Is that a proverb?
I kept the better quality of things I made.
Yeah, she did keep. So we still have some mugs and bowls that she made, some coffee mugs and stuff. But as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Julie, there are different types of clay, right? And you have to use the right kind of clay to make a particular type of a vessel. Potter can only create the type of pot that the clay that they're working on, that she's working on, will allow her to create. Clay is not merely passive in your hands. It responds to you. Some clay is elastic and some clay is crumbly and hard to shape. So clay provides a good analogy, an interesting analogy to the subject that we're talking about today. You should be concerned with providing the most stable shaping influences that you can, but you can't assume that you're merely molding passive clay. The clay responds to your shaping. It either accepts the shaping you're trying to give it or it rejects it. Children are never passive receivers of shaping, rather they are active responders. So your son or daughter responds according to their Godward focus. That's the other second bullet point I had up on the screen there. The Godward focus of their life. If your child knows and loves God, if your child has embraced the fact that knowing God can enable him to know peace in any circumstance, then he will respond constructively to your shaping efforts. If your child does not know and love God, but tries to satisfy his soul's thirst by drinking from cisterns that cannot hold water, as Jeremiah 2:13 talks about, your child may rebel against your best efforts. You have to do all that God has called you to do, but the outcome is more complex than whether you have done the right things in the right way. Your children are responsible for the way they respond to your parenting. Determinism, if we fall into that temptation, makes parents conclude that the good shaping influences will automatically produce good children, and that bears bitter fruit later in life. If you become a parent who has an unruly or troublesome teenager or a young adult, you conclude the problem is the shaping influences that you provided. You think that if you made a little better home, things would have turned out better. And you forget that the child is never determined solely by the shaping influences. Remember Proverbs 4:23, your child's heart is the fountain from which their life flows. So your child's heart determines how they respond to your parenting. One of the other helpful stories that Tripp tells in the book is of Mr. and Mrs. Everett. They had a rebellious 15-year-old son, and they could see that they had made many mistakes as they reflected on how they raised this rebellious teenager. They realized they made some really bad mistakes. But because they were so sensitive to the mistakes they had made, they were blinded to what his actual need right now is. When they looked at their son, all they thought about was their own failures. They were failing to see that their son was choosing not to believe God and not to obey God, even though he knew he should. They hadn't been perfect parents, that's true. They were right about that. But their son had not been a good son. That was true too. They were both true. And so their view failed to consider the fact that human beings are creatures who are directed by the orientation of their heart. The child's not just a blank slate. Your children interact with life, and this leads to the next part of our model, your child's Godward orientation. And that is where we're going to pick up next week. And holy cow, it is right on the button. Wow, that timed out perfect. It's a good thing we took a little extra time on break. All right, so thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.